Hello, welcome back to the Russia, the Soviet Union, and Beyond, Chapter 1. Today, we're going to be covering a few topics just to get us started with the history of Russia. So to place Russian and Soviet history in the proper context, we must comprehend the underlying geography, climate, and ethnic factors that come along with those Russian and Soviet topics. These factors pretty much help create the Russian and Soviet Union countries that we see today. The unique struggles that those people faced has shaped them into what they became. And this chapter will discuss the geography, the peoples, and Russia's response to challenges in general. So, Russia geography map. The Soviet Union, at its most significant, was 3 times larger than the United States. It was over 6,000 miles long, 3,000 miles wide, and spanned over 11 time zones. It occupied 1/6 of the land area around the globe. With such a size, the Soviet Union had incredible resource and location opportunities to be the hegemonic state of the Eurasian landmass. But with modern-day Russia's territorial borders, it's no longer in that position anymore. So the Russian plain. Most of Russia is a large plain that extends from Poland to the Pacific Ocean. The plain narrows as you travel eastward due to the mountain ranges in eastern Siberia. The Ural Mountains divide the Russian heartland from Siberia. Here's the Ural Mountains in the Caspian Sea. However, the Ural Mountains don't completely divide the Europe portion of Russia with Siberia. They don't extend completely into the Caspian Sea. And what ends up happening is a big 800-mile gap exists in between those Ural Mountains and modern-day Western Kazakhstan. Asian invaders, you'll see in this course, are going to exploit this gap for as long as Russia exists. And then we'll move on to the Carpathian, the Caucasus, Pamir, Tien, Shan, and Altai mountains. So Russia's not only cursed by frontier gaps, but blessed by impressive mountain ranges at its borders. It has the Carpathians to the southwest, the Caucasus in the south, the Pamir, Tien Shan, and Altai mountains on the borders of respectively Afghanistan, India, and China. European Russia, or the non-Siberia Asia Russia, is where most of Russian history is going to take place. And that part of Russia is mostly flat and low, except for the Valdai Hills to the northwest. The Valdai Hills are important. They're significant because the great European Russian rivers originate from there. The Volga, the Daugava, which is in the western Dvina, the Lovat, the Msta, and the Dnieper, the Sias, and the other rivers form from the Valdai Hills. The region thus is divided between the drainage basins of the Caspian Sea from the Volga, the Black Sea from the Dnieper, and the Baltic Sea from the Msta and the Lovat via the Volkhov, and Sayaz via Lake Lagada and the Neva and the Daugava. And I probably bastardized all those names. I'm sorry. Sea commerce. So these rivers will be the centers of communication and commerce for all of European history. And they're going to greatly influence commerce for the Russians. In modern times, those peoples have built canal constructions from all those rivers, which has further enabled the capabilities for commerce between all those rivers. The Siberian rivers, they're going to offer lesser value, mainly just because of their location in Siberia. That's like where 20% of the Russian population lives, where, as you may know, 80% of the Russian population lives in the European Russian side. But the Amur is the only river in this exception, which runs eastward to the Pacific, and it borders China. So this is going to be one of strategic significance. Moving on to climate. So Russia's going to experience heat and cold to the extremes. And this is because Russia's pretty much has continental climate. As I said, it's huge, and its huge landmass is so vast that it's going to experience different climate extremes depending on where you are in the country. Most of Russia lies in the latitudes of Canada and Alaska. Most of the bitter cold perpetuates as you travel eastward, but even in the European Russia on the west side, since no mountain ranges exist to block the Arctic winds, freezing winds will still sweep through southward all the way down to the Black Sea. Northeast Siberia is one of the coldest places on Earth, and it's capable. There has been times where the temperatures have gone down to negative 90 degrees Fahrenheit. In the Central Asian deserts of Russia, temperatures there can get as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Precipitation in Russia is generally moderate to light, and most of it typically happens in the summertime. So for Russian vegetation, there are 7 types of vegetation zones. Depends on the map you're looking at. I've seen some maps with like 12 and some with less than 7. But for this course, we're going to identify 7 of them. So first would be the Russian tundra. This occupies 15% of the country. And basically the tundra or treeless plains are going to be mostly in the extreme northeast. 47% of which is permanently frozen subsoil. And the tundra is a virtually uninhabited wasteland with many lakes, swamps, moss, and the only foliage you're going to see is low-lying shrubs. Next is the Russian taiga, or Taiga, south of the tundra. And as we go through these vegetation zones, we're going to be pretty much starting from the northeast and then moving our way down to the southwest. So the taiga is the coniferous forests. It becomes a little more deciduous in the more southern regions, but for the most part, it's coniferous. This forest belt is the largest in the world, and it goes across all of Russia, and it occupies half of its territories. And then the soil in the taiga is pretty much unfit for crops. However, there are some places where agriculture is possible, like in the southern region, where you have the more deciduous regions. And it requires the population to clear out those forests to sow. Next is going to be the mixed forest. So again, we're continuing more southwest. We arrive at the mixed forest. This is where we're going to get a pretty healthy mix between deciduous and coniferous trees. The mixed forest is going to have more fertile soils, and this also happens to be where Muscovite Russia sits, or Moscow. After the mixed forests, you start getting into the Russian steppe, or the Russian steppe zone. You could kind of subdivide this into the wooded steppe, and then the non-wooded steppe. So the wooded steppe, it's excellent territory for grain agriculture. However, that's very dependent on the rain. So even though it's excellent for grain agriculture, if there's no rains, then it's not good anymore, obviously. And then the woodless steppe, think of this as like treeless prairies with patches of semi-desert. And then after the semi-desert, you get into the actual desert. And so to the south and to the east is where you're going to find the Russian deserts. And then if you continue further west, you hit Russian subtropics. And this is going to be near Crimea and along the Caucasian shores of the Black Sea. That's basically the subtropical region. It's very small compared to all the other regions. And then I'll show you the Russian vegetation zones map again. So early frosts, short growing season, and barren or frozen soil mean that only 10% of all this huge Soviet Union territory can be cultivated, despite 1/3 of the land being arable. For example, in some regions with arable land, the rainfall just simply isn't sufficient enough to produce a yield. Even the rich black soil of the southern steppe has a shorter growing season compared to the American plains. Russia's geography has influenced the history of colonization and expansion. Russians cleared forest glades and farmed the steppe lands. It will become typical to occupy lands west and south where the agriculture is more sustainable. And this is going to play into the Russian culture. Russian geography. So Russia is blessed and cursed. It's blessed with natural ocean frontiers to the north and east and huge mountain boundaries to the south and the southwest. These borders were solidified over centuries of invasions from the outsiders and then expansions from the insiders. The European steppe. So this is where Russia's geography is not good. So Russia lacks the natural barriers that we talked about to their west side. In modern history, most invasions of Russia come from the west, which is why Russia greatly desires to expand in a westward direction. And most of the USSR was a westward expansion of the Russia heartland. Let's move to the ethnic groups in Russia. The former Soviet Union was a multinational and multi-ethnic country. More than 180 nationalities, 125 languages and dialects, and 40 religions. And many of these groups were not small. For example, 95 of them numbered more than 100,000 people each. And 54 of them had their own national territories. 3/4 of the population were Eastern Slavs who began as a single people, but separated after the Mongol invasion of 1237 to 1241. They divided into Russians, Ukrainians, and the Belorussians, which is what Belarus comes from. Russians, or Great Russians, are the most populous at around 145 million people, or 51%. They played the dominant historical and political role in the Russian history. Next is Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians originate from the Kievan Rus and number at around 45 million today. Today, 85% of them reside in the Ukraine, with the rest living in Russia and neighboring countries. Next, we got the Belorussians, or White Russians. They number more than 10 million and comprise 80% of the Belarus population. Belorussia was absorbed into the Russian Empire in the 17th and 18th centuries. Poland, the Poles, are the fourth largest Slavic group. The Soviet Union had 1 million Poles, and they were forced to join the Soviet Union in 1939 after the Soviet annexation of Eastern Poland in 1939. Next is Baltics. The Baltic peoples of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia number 5.5 million. They were annexed to the USSR in 1939 due to the Nazi-Soviet pact. Latvian and Lithuanian are languages with roots from Finnish, and Estonian is a Uralic language also with roots from Finnish. The three peoples or countries are primarily Catholic and Lutheran. Next is the Caucasus. So the leading peoples of the Caucasus are Armenians, Georgians, and Azerbaijani. Their countries have about 15 million people. They were annexed into the Russian Empire in 1828. And unlike their Christian neighbors, the Muslim Azerbaijani speak a Turkic language, and many live in neighboring Iran. The Caucasus groups contain many other smaller groups that exercise autonomous status. The Russian Muslims. Muslims are the largest religious group in the former USSR, with 50 million people. The next most prominent is the Eastern Orthodox. In the Volga River Basin, Turco-Tartar people such as the Kazan Tartars, the Bashkirs, the Chuvas live. They are the descendants of the Mongol and Turkic warriors that conquered Russia in the 13th century. South Muslim USSR countries. So further east is 5 Soviet Union republics arbitrarily established during the Union's early formation. They are the Uzbek, Kazakh, Turkmen, Tajik, and Kirghiz republics. They're all now independent countries. Most are Muslims with Turkic languages, except for the Iranian Tajiks. And then you also got German and Jewish Russians. So the other large ethnic groups in Russia who don't have their own nations are the Germans at 1.5 million and the Jews at 1.8 million, but they mostly just live in the cities inside the European part of Russia. So for the Russian language, it's the primary language of the Soviet Union and the military of the Soviet Union. It was spoken by 60% of Russian inhabitants, but it was always studied as a second language where Russia was not the primary speaking language of the town or state. Ukrainian is the second most spoken language, and Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian are all Cyrillic languages. They all have the same Cyrillic alphabet. So let's move on to Russian responses to challenges. Location, climate, and topography have challenged the Russian people severely during a bloody and turbulent history. Historically, Russia was a developing country where people extracted a precarious living from the soil. Poverty, vulnerability to attack, and poor internal communications combined to produce responses distinguishing Russia significantly from their Western Europe and United States counterparts. Primary Russian reactions to the severe challenges have included autocracy, collectivism, and mysticism, and these concepts may provide keys for unlocking the controversial Russian past. Autocracy. So autocracy or statism emerged in Russia after the 1450s. It did not exist prior to that. It persisted until recently as a centralized monarchy or communist state with a monopoly on power. Russian dictatorships have historically had trouble implementing meaningful change. Well into the 19th century, Russia was very undergoverned due to its difficulty of exerting its dominance over its own large, vast empire. It just couldn't reach the far extensions of its own empire, and so those places experienced a lot of autonomy oftentimes. Next, collectivism. So individuality and subversion to the state was obviously highly encouraged by the autocratic regimes that persisted throughout Russian history. Collectivism aided in effectively repelling foreign invaders and internal threats. Collectivism brought on the system of the Russian communes, the state farming, and the serfdoms that we'll learn about. Mysticism. The Eastern Orthodox relatively lacked the intellectual inquiry of the Western Catholic and Protestant faiths. Its culture didn't bring rationalism or generalized questioning like the other Western countries did. Muscovites were more concerned with how to spell Jesus correctly in the Cyrillic language than they were with sciences and philosophies. Traditions were of a higher significance compared to the West. The people believed that the Soviet lands were the home of the only true faith, which led to the persistence of a xenophobia that we still see today. So, I don't know if you ever heard of the great man theory, but there are some incredibly impactful leaders in Russian history like Ivan the Great, Ivan the Terrible, Lenin, Stalin, that have significantly shaped the history of Russia. But for a complete historical analysis in this course, I'm going to make an effort to trace more significant themes of collectivism, autocracy, and mysticism to provide an entire story to the history of Russia. And my final thoughts. It's essential to understand the geography of a nation when studying history. The culture from the fertile Nile basin in Egypt was completely different from the Mesopotamians who dealt with unpredictable floods and warring states from all directions. Geography can damn you, and it could bless you with fertile soils and natural boundaries to protect you. Understanding all the cultures of different people who pass through is essential too. Each culture and person leaves a footprint behind. In the next lesson, we will learn about the ancient Rus and the early occupants of the landmass. Thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing and sharing this video with your friends if you like what you learned today. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.